From UFOs to psychic powers and government conspiracies, history is riddled with unexplained events. You can turn back now, or learn the stuff they don't want you to know.
I think you've seen it before, maybe just everybody on this call, but my son was gifted a Mickey Mouse doll that is like human-sized. It's bigger than my son.
Oh, I remember that. Yeah, I remember Mickey.
Is that one of those gifts where as a parent you're kind of like, thanks?
Well, I mean, he loved it at the time when he first got it. He still loves it now. Calls him Big Mickey. At night, when I'm putting my son to sleep, and that thing is in the room, I am telling you, no matter what my personal beliefs, just sitting it in the corner in the shadows and seeing its dimensions there is something utterly creepy about it. And I don't know how it doesn't give my son nightmares. He says he feels safer knowing that it's there.
Well, he grew up with it, you know?
It's true.
Like I've got, I probably had a different background from you guys because in my earlier years, my very early years, I did have some sketchy family characters whom I loved dearly. One of them I may have mentioned to you guys off air before was my great aunt Nine, spelled like the number, and she was regarded as a practitioner of things that might be considered, hedge magic or folk magic. And she had quite a collection of all sorts of interesting things and artifacts. And this was the first person I met who had dolls that she considered dangerous, dolls that were made for a purpose of specific types. And this is something that is going to be familiar with a lot of the folklorists in the crowd today. It's also an ancient practice, and it's a practice I was not aware of at the time, but we'll get to it. So I guess in a way I had early experiences with dangerous dolls, and my Aunt Nine has passed on to whatever is on the other side of this crazy improv exercise we call life. But I think that colored my perception of dolls in general. When I would see other people with these things, I would inevitably think like, "Oh, what are they doing with this one? Is this like a Barbie, or is this like a don't touch it, someone will get sick kind of thing?" But yeah, we're talking about the things that are commonly regarded as toys or collector's items here in the modern age. For some of us, those are very nostalgic relics of childhood. For others, they're irredeemably creepy. It's no surprise that when people talk about haunted objects nowadays, they tend to talk most often about dolls. And there are a couple of pop culture reasons that are very obvious that we'll get to, but one of the most infamous haunted objects in 2021 is a doll called Annabelle. And this comes to us from the Warrens that we mentioned at the top, that we also did an episode on. I forgot about that.
Is it a two-part? No, it's just a one-parter. It's great. Really great info on the Warrens, so let's talk about them. They are paranormal investigators. They are, I believe they style themselves as demonologists.
Mm-hmm.
Is that true, Ben? I think,
yeah.
Yep, demonologist.
Ed Warren,
Ed Warren passed away, I believe.
That's correct.
But he was a demonologist, and Annabelle first was made known to them way back in 1970, and you probably know it because of the film series, but this was a real doll that these paranormal investigators and demonologists encountered. There was a student nurse who contacted them because they were already kind of known for what they did. She claimed that the doll was just being weird. Like, hey, I got this doll and it's weird. It's not just weird looking, it's being weird. It's doing stuff. She said that a psychic told her it was inhabited by the spirit of a dead person, a girl named Annabelle. And immediately the Warrens were like, okay, yeah, we need to see this doll. Let's check it out. And the legend was born.
Right. Yeah. According to the accounts from the Warrens, this nursing student had a roommate, and she and her roommate, when they had learned from a psychic that this doll was inhabited by a spirit of a dead human girl, they tried to make peace of sorts, to arrive at an armistice, and respect its space, pay obeisance to it, etc. But they had no luck. The events continued, and they accelerated, and they became worrisome and frightening, and potentially, depending on how you hear it described, dangerous. So in desperation, the student reaches out to the Warrens, just like you said, Matt. Long story short, you can hear more about it in our previous episode. The doll, Annabelle, is currently contained in a glass display box at the Warrens Occult Museum there in Monroe, Connecticut. You can go look at it. It doesn't look like the Annabelle of the movies. I would argue it looks a little more creepy, but as you can imagine, skeptics have some issues with the story here. They're not quite accusing. Not everybody is saying, these folks are con artists or anything like that. There's a guy named Joseph Laycock who wrote a fantastic article about this. At the time, he was a Texas State University assistant professor of religious studies. He thinks the story may have been influenced by the cultural ecology of the time, by the zeitgeist, because 1970, you said, right? That's when the story of Annabelle again begins, according to the Warrens. Something else happened a few years prior. There were other scary doll tropes, like a great Twilight Zone episode called Living Doll, which came out just about 5 years before that Warren story. And this doesn't prove anything, but the character of the mother in that episode is also named Annabelle. So if you're really skeptical or you're kind of cynical, do you think Ed Warren found this doll and kind of thought about the Twilight Zone and then said, we'll call it Annabelle? I don't know.
Maybe, or even if it's true that this nursing student really was experiencing something weird, maybe it was because of that Twilight Zone episode that she caught. Who knows? It's all kind of conjecture, right? Hey, can we just take a moment and really appreciate Noel's hat right now? Just before we do anything else.
Well, can we appreciate the fact that this hat was gifted to me by the magnanimous Ben Bolin? It says Illuminati on the bottom. And what does it say on the top?
Don't trust
anyone.
Yes.
That's killer.
100% not haunted, by the way.
Yeah, definitely not haunted. I do trust some people. Definitely trust you too, mostly. But I do like the hat, and I wanted to rock it today. So thank you, Ben.
Oh,
sorry for taking us away there, guys.
Well, we're talking.
I just saw it.
We're talking about objects, right? That's another object. There's the nihilistic argument that we're all just objects, floating in space. And really, if you think about it, I was going to save this for later, but if you think about it, you are listening from a haunted object right now. You are, as a consciousness, as a mind, you are inhabiting a body. You are haunting it. You are possessing it. Your body is a haunted house. Just happens to be growing all the time.
So
before
I lose my
I love that John Mayer song, Your Body is a Haunted House.
Yeah, it's a good one. It's better than the Temple one. This brings us to the idea of haunted dolls in the modern day. So excellent horror franchise, The Conjuring. They get a hold of this story. It's been around before. They're like the spooky docuseries, unsolved mysteries type investigations. But The Conjuring takes it to the world of fiction, or people might argue even further into the world of fiction. And Annabelle goes from being an oddity in a small Connecticut museum to a global phenomenon, the subject of 3 different films, and it cements its status as the world's most famous haunted doll, if not most famous haunted object. But it's not alone. There is another there are actually multiple examples of allegedly haunted dolls specifically, and we found one that you might not have heard of unless this was already very much your bag of badgers, your bag of stuffed badgers, your stuffed bag of stuffed badgers. Anyway, you might be surprised to hear of another doll that came to prominence around the same time, whose name is simply Robert. Full name, Robert the doll.
I just want to go ahead and apologize to Robert before we even start talking about him. Just Robert, we're sorry. We're just talking about you for the purposes of this show.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you've done a lot for the podcast, Robert. We just feel like this is a story we need to tell. In full disclosure, Robert may or may not be on the board of Illumination Global Unlimited. So we want you to know that we're doing our best to be fully transparent and to not exhibit a conflict of interest. Robert's a real physical doll, and you guys know how I hate, I don't respect clowning people for physical features or anything like that. But I guess we can get away with it maybe with Robert. Can we say it? Can we just say the quiet part out loud? He is creepy looking.
Yeah, he really is creepy looking. You can go online to a lot of places and see actual images of Robert.
First and foremost, robertthedoll.org. Just have to throw that out there. Love that URL exists.
That is one.
He's like a creepy sailor. He looks like kind of like a doll where it's like, show me where the bad man touched you kind of doll. Also like maybe like a dummy you would use to do like CPR practice or something like that, but very uncanny. These weird segments of fabric that are joined together to make the different sections of his face. That seems very Hannibal Lecter-y. That's the only. I don't know. That's
So let's talk about Robert. Robert was, let's say, the possession of. It's a doll. It's a thing. So it was owned by Robert Eugene Otto. That is a person.
I propose we call Robert Eugene Otto Gene for the purpose of this story, just to keep it clear.
Fully, 100%. Gene was Robert's caretaker, let's say. And you can read a lot of different stories, origin stories, some that claim to be original, some that seem to be sort of fan fiction. You can read just a ton of different versions of Robert's story. But let's just talk about the official one that you can find there on that website you just mentioned, Noel.
Yes, it was created as a one-of-a-kind creepy doll by the Stief Company. I'm thinking it's Stief, might be Stief. I'm going to go with Stief Company of Germany near the turn of the century. I don't want to irritate Robert. He is 40 inches tall and stuffed with wood wool, which is known as Excelsior. Which I am tickled by, because Excelsior is also a term that journalists would maybe use to define something of excellent quality, maximum luxury. And it was Marvel Comics legend Stan Lee's personal life motto, Excelsior, with an exclamation mark at the end. But it's also wood wool shavings. So it's basically just like wood sawdusty type shavings that you can use to stuff something with. So probably already has a bit of a shed-like smell to it. And yes, he is in fact dressed like a sailor in a little sailor suit. And at one point, he was painted kind of like a court jester. But all that stuff is worn off over the years. And he is quite large, right?
Yes, yeah, he's a big Mickey, all his own. So the official story is that the Otto family was a pretty prominent family in Key West, Florida. And Otto's grandfather was on a trip to Germany in 1904. This is where he is believed to have picked up Robert as a gift for his grandson. The story is, as Matt said, a little murky at this point because the legends get a little bit juicier. You'll see one that claims a young woman of Bahamian descent gave Otto this doll either as a gift or as a curse, kind of a poison apple for some unspecified slight. And whatever the case, whether the legend or the official story, the truth of the matter is that Otto becomes incredibly enamored of and attached to this doll. He names it after himself, Robert the Doll. Something interesting happens psychologically. He gets his folks to build a boy's home, a boy's room in the attic, in the family attic, just for Robert, complete with toys, chairs, a bed, the whole nine. And then he started blaming anything wrong that he did on this doll. They would say like, hey, did you track in mud on the floor or sand or something like that? And he would say, that wasn't me. That was Robert. And they would say, oh, okay, Gene. But this is starting to get a little weird, is this your imaginary friend, etc. They probably didn't think about it at the time, but I know a lot of our fellow conspiracy realists in the audience are wondering, was this boy making a tulpa, a thought form? Interesting.
Yeah, or was he dealing with something, mental health like in his life, some kind of disassociation or some kind of, application of his own actions onto this thing Anyway, I'm not a psychologist. Who knows what was going on inside Gene and or Robert? But it's definitely strange because it wasn't just a childhood thing, right? This relationship between Robert the man and Robert the doll continued.
Yes, Gene became a pretty well-known regional artist who is widely considered an eccentric. The partnership between Robert the guy and Robert the doll continued well into adulthood. That's an interesting point about disassociation, too. We would have to ask where it came from. Could there have been some sort of traumatic situation occurring? If so, that's lost to history. Eventually, Robert the man, Robert Eugene Otto, passes away. His wife, who survives him, has always hated this thing. You know what I mean? She's of the mind that, call her conservative, but she's thinking a marriage is between two people, not two people and a doll. Anyhow, as soon as he passes away, she orders that this doll be locked up in a cedar chest and hidden in the attic and never touched again. She passes away, and years after her death, this doll, Robert, is rediscovered. And now, if you wish, you can visit Robert at the East Martello Museum. Oh, we should mention it wasn't just a situation of Gene, Robert the man, be weird around the doll. Other people said the doll would do weird stuff, like it would move, it would exhibit facial expressions. Maybe there was some
change. Yeah,
it would change. People would hear voices around it, things like that. And now, if you wish, you can visit Robert. He still has his stuffed teddy bear too, because he had his own toys. Remember?
Oh, dude, I forgot about that. That was the whole thing. If you check out Robert at the museum right now, he's holding a doll himself. So it is I don't know, man. I wonder if that teddy bear then becomes the next thing.
Right. Somehow infected, or it's a host. But it's strange because if you look at the history of this guy, it came into the public eye kind of around the same time as Annabelle, or its discovery, which means it was also a few years after that Twilight Zone episode. So we know that when people go to visit Robert at this museum, some people will still report that they've experienced something they can't explain, and a lot of people write to the doll after visiting him. Isn't that correct?
That's right. Apology letters are often written to Robert for visiting him without his permission. If you go to many YouTube videos about Robert the doll, you will see in the comment section post after post of people saying, "Hey, sorry, Robert. We want to learn about your story. Didn't mean to disturb you, or sorry for watching or learning about you without your permission." That's why I was joking about that earlier.
I, for one, would like to extend a heartfelt apology to Robert for all the terrible things I said earlier in the podcast. So please, for my humblest apologies, Robert, and please forgive me. Forgive me.
Robert, I hope you're doing well. I feel no need to apologize to you. I do wish you the best, but I will point out that you seem to be treated better than a lot of human beings these days.
Man, throwing shade at Robert. I'm so glad that we have an image like looking behind you, Ben. So when Robert just kind of creeps up behind your shoulder, we'll be able to give you just a split-second warning.
That's not a ding. That's not a ding on Robert. That's a ding on the human species. Treat each other better. You know what I mean? Who else should you be apologizing to, folks? Anyway, that's... Anyway, those are the circumstances. We just thought that's an interesting story because it shows that there's not just one example of this. In fact, there are multiple other examples. There's Letta the doll in Australia. There's Okiku in Japan. The list goes on and on. So we have these cases of things that predate Annabelle, the most famous haunted doll, by a bit. But the truth of the matter is that the story goes much, much deeper. You see, haunted dolls, or some version of them, date back into antiquity. What are we talking about? We'll tell you after a word from our sponsors. Guys, yeah, no, seriously though, Matt, please keep an eye on the background and thank you. I might have overshot my shot there.
I had to make it right.